Hello everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Video Clips. And I'm going to talk about all kinds of different things today, ranging from the resistance to some people who are trying to get something done in a productive way. And I'll start with Ohio. We were, I think, the first state that had a protest, and our protests have been pretty huge over time, and I know a lot of other states having some great protests as well. But we have a wonderful organization here called the 1851 Center for Constitutional Law, which has filed several lawsuits, and we won one. Not we, but they won one. I consider it a victory for all of us. This week, what happened in Ohio Court of Common Pleas Wednesday morning of this week, enjoined the Ohio governor and director of the Department of Health from imposing or enforcing penalties solely for noncompliance with the director's orders against gymnasiums, health clubs, fitness centers, gyms, and workout facilities. And so basically this was filed on behalf of 35 gyms and workout facilities, but over time this could be expanded. I'm sure the state will probably appeal, and one of the reasons is because the next step is monetary damages. So we may sign on as plaintiffs at some point in time. We have a yoga studio and a gym here, and fortunately that's a pretty small part of our revenue, so it hasn't made any difference to us. But for people who this is their sole source of income, it's really important. So I'll read to you the decision. I think this is really interesting. Judge Eugene Lucci of the Lake County Court of Common Pleas explains that private property rights are fundamental rights in Ohio, and that Ohio Department of Health has both violated these rights and exceeded its own authority and, quote, criminalizing lawful businesses and imposing strict liability for violations, including severe criminal, civil, and equitable penalties. The director has no statutory authority to close all businesses, including the plaintiff's gyms. She has acted in an impermissibly arbitrary, unreasonable, and oppressive manner without any procedural safeguards. The ruling further excoriates the Department of Health's insistence that and this is a quote, one unelected individual could exercise such unfettered power to force everyone to obey impermissibly vague rules without any legislative guidance. Constitutions are written to prevent governments from arbitrarily interfering in citizens' lives and businesses. On that front, the call to action is clear. The governor and health director may no longer impose their own closures and regulations and write their own criminal penalties to enforce those regulations and closures. We remain available to serve those who are caught in the state's tangled web of unlawful orders. That's according to Maurice Thompson, head of the 1851 Center. And by the way, the day after this was filed, our governor decided to allow the gyms to open. I think he saw this coming, and isn't it better to look like you're still in charge and give permission than wait until the court tells you you have to do it? So anyway, the last word from the health department is they're reviewing the order and determining if they're going to appeal. These lawsuits are happening all over, and I just had somebody email me this morning about another lawsuit that's been filed in Lake County Common Pleas Court here in Ohio. 20 businesses across the state are suing on behalf of amusement games in bars, restaurants, and bowling alleys. Amusement games include billiards, pinball, video, and arcade games. The lawsuit filed by Akron-based Stark and Knoll Company argues that the order was issued by the Department of Health, quote, without any basis to support the conclusion that the patrons of bars, restaurants, and bowling alleys cannot safely participate in such games. So I won't read the whole thing to you, but really what the crux of this is, and this is just two of the suits that are in Ohio, and they're being filed all over the country. In fact, we're being contacted by law firms, and please feel free to contact us if you are suing and you need information, you need expert witnesses, you need people to, you need documentation. We can help you with that, but we're hearing from both plaintiffs and attorneys about this. And the crux of the matter is this. So one of the lawsuits here in Ohio was on behalf of a bridal shop owner who saw her clients by appointment only. And so if you only have one or two people in your store, tell me why that's a health risk and she has to shut down, when every time I go to the grocery store, There are people walking right by each other in the aisles, and we're all standing a foot apart at the cashier station. You know, it's a very arbitrary thing who they decided could be and not be in business. And, you know, I want to say this to be crystal clear. I never agreed with the lockdown, but had the lockdown happened for 2 weeks and then we all got to go back to work, we never had to stop, but other people got to go back to work. You know, I think that we wouldn't probably have all the lawsuits, we wouldn't have all the bankruptcies and the unemployment and all that either. But the lockdown persisted and is still going on in many states way beyond that initial 2 weeks. While the hospitals are empty, we're still getting those every day. Here's a picture of an empty hospital, closed on the door. People sending us evidence, doctors, nurses, that they're filing for unemployment. They've been furloughed. Thousands and thousands and thousands of doctors and nurses being laid off. And so this is ridiculous, right? We've bent the curve, we've flattened the curve, we can stop that mantra now, it's time to go back to normal. And along that line, this appeared in USA Today, I believe, and it's from a couple of senators, and it's in response to Anthony Fauci's testimony in front of the Senate. And, you know, I found his testimony revolting, to tell you the truth. I mean, it takes a special level of disconnection to be in or to say that you're in public health, and then to ignore the collateral damage. I talked about this yesterday that's going on right now. So I'll just read you some excerpts of this because I think it's really good. As much as we respect Dr. Anthony Fauci's service to our country and medical opinion, we disagree that his current positions on the virus outbreak provide the best path forward. Instead, discouraging states from reopening will only prolong a long-term public health and economic crisis. Fauci and company have relied on models that were later found to be deficient. He's even suggested that he can't rely on any of the models, especially if the underlying assumptions are wrong. Yet Fauci persists in advocating policies that have emasculated the medical care system and ruined the economy. Fauci claims his message has been consistent, but it's contrary to that of the administration he works for. I want to say something about this. This is a very important point. The models were wrong. The Imperial College of London was off by 96%. And the one in Washington State was off by something like 56%. I don't remember the exact number. What responsible public health officials like Fauci would have done, and Birx and the state health departments, is say, we were wrong about this, and now we can adjust life to the new set of data that we're working with that shows that we don't have the crisis that we were told we were going to have, right? They didn't do that. Okay, so while President Donald Trump urged governors to safely open our country, Fauci testified to a Senate committee last week that opening too soon would, quote, result in needless suffering and death. Well, he also told us, quote, that 2 million people were going to die in the United States. What about the countless stories of needless suffering and death produced by Fauci's one-size-fits-all approach to public health? It's inconvenient from a societal standpoint, from an economic standpoint, to go through this, Fauci stated at the end of March. It's inconvenient. You have allowed millions of businesses to close, many of which are not going to reopen. I get letters every day from people who are talking about businesses that are the third generation of people operating a business, decades to build it, gone in a matter of months. You know, the average business doesn't have enough cash on hand to stay open for a month without revenue. We're into month 2 and 3, and some of these nitwits are talking about closing down their states until August or September, or until a vaccine is available. You're ruining people. And he calls this inconvenient. I mean, this is what's bothered me about medicine since I got into this business 25 years ago. It's a lot of what I've been writing about. The callous disregard for human life that goes on in medicine all the time. We have an opiate epidemic, which is resurging thanks to the policies of these terrible people. And at the end of the day, only the pill mill doctors went to jail. And I think a whole bunch of these physicians who are prescribing these drugs should have gone to jail. I'm digressing, but this is a persistent problem. And Fauci is like the poster child for it. It's inconvenient from a societal standpoint and economic standpoint. Well, Fauci, you get your salary every day, and you get the royalties from the patents that you own as chief of the NIAID. You don't have anything to be inconvenient about. You sit there in your nicely pressed suit, in your he was talking to the Senate from his very lovely home. You don't look like you really have kids to feed and not enough money to do it. So don't tell me about inconvenience. I love that. That's right up there with the we're all in this together. Yeah, right. So the letter goes on to say, Where's the compassion for the people whose lives have been wrecked by his policies when he's tried to scare the American people all this time? Unbelievably, Fauci has suggested that the economic and societal impacts of policies which he has advocated were not considered when he offered his advice. It seems to us that he hasn't fully considered the public health risks either. We're seeing hospitals and medical groups closing because they couldn't treat patients. The very foundation of medical care has been rocked, not solely because of the virus, but also the response to the virus. As a medical bureaucrat in faraway Washington, perhaps he cannot empathize with millions of Americans who have already closed down their businesses or are poised to lose them and their life savings, and who have seen their retirement funds depleted as the economy soured. Maybe he is simply oblivious to the health problems that inure when a person is one of the more 33 million Americans who've lost their jobs. It's over 40 million now. What a great public health policy this is, Mr. Fauci. I won't call him doctor ever again. Is it possible that he has not been keeping up with the stories of people who have experienced significant health problems due to the economic and emotional stress resulting from his insistence on closing what was once the most robust economy in the world? It isn't just the economy that has been innervated. The foundation of healthcare has also been ruptured. Now that the governors are trying to open up their communities, allow hospitals to determine whether they can provide elective surgeries, and trust the American people to exercise their freedom responsibly, Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx have attempted to scuttle the opening. And so he finishes, I skipped over some of this here, but coronavirus is a terrifying illness that could leave millions of survivors with PTSD. But the answer to America's problems has rarely been the federal government. Our solutions have been in trusting the American people. Freedom allows us to judge the risk and reward and determine a course we think best. And that's what I was saying yesterday. Every time I get in a car, there's a risk of an accident. 1.35 million people die in accidents every year. I'm an adult. I'm 63 years old. I can determine if I want to take the risk to drive a car. So the letter continues, if we feel going to a certain retail or barbershop, restaurant, or some other business is risky, we have the judgment to decide whether or not to go there. If we want to stay home, we can. In the end, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and others seek to corral our freedom, just as the American people and many of our elected leaders are finding ways to open our society. And I think that that's a very poignant article and letter from a couple of senators. And again, public health is about mitigation, and to sit there in your lovely home in your freshly pressed suit and tell people that, it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient to go out of business and have no source of income. Is that the term for it, Mr. Fauci? You really call that inconvenient? It's inconvenient. Yesterday I talked about a 13-year-old kid who hung himself in the house. That's inconvenient. It's very inconvenient when your kid commits suicide because you've left him in such despair and fear. It's inconvenient when people die by themselves. I have more to report on that this week too, because you're not allowed in the nursing home, and only one person at a time can be with a dying person. That's all for Fauci. It's just inconvenient. All right, so on to the next thing. 600 doctors signed a letter which was sent to the president, and I think this really is. Probably Fauci will never read it. I'm sure he doesn't read anything that doesn't agree with his stance on this. And I don't think anything he reads would change his mind anyway. I think he has the same chip implanted in his head that our health director in Ohio has. Flatten the curve. We have to flatten the curve. The answer to everything is flatten the curve. People are going bankrupt. We have to flatten the curve, flatten the curve, flatten the curve. Well, it's pretty flat right now, and we better start ramping up the curve of employment and income before we have more starving people than we can feed in this country. So here's what the letter says. Thousands of physicians in all specialties from all states would like to express our gratitude for your leadership. We write to you today to express our alarm over the exponentially growing negative health consequences of the national shutdown. In medical terms, the shutdown was a mass casualty incident. During a mass casualty incident, victims are immediately triaged to black, red, yellow, or green. The first group, triage level black, includes those who require too many resources to save during a mass crisis. The red group has severe injuries that are survivable with treatment. The yellow group has serious injuries that are not immediately life-threatening, and the green group has minor injuries. The red group receives the highest priority. The next priority is to ensure the other two groups do not deteriorate a level. Decades of research have shown that by strictly following this algorithm, we save the maximum number of lives. Millions of Americans are already at triage level red. These include 150,000 Americans per month who would have had a new cancer detected through routine screening that hasn't happened, millions who have missed routine dental care to fix problems strongly linked to heart disease and death, and preventable cases of stroke, heart attack, and child abuse. Suicide hotline phone calls have increased 600%. Tens of millions are at triage level yellow. Liquor sales have increased 300 to 600%. Cigarette sales have increased. Rent has gone unpaid. Family relationships have become frayed. And millions of well-child checkups have been missed. Hundreds of millions are at triage level green. These are people who are currently solvent, but at risk should economic conditions worsen. Poverty and financial uncertainty is closely linked to poor health. It's interesting because if you'd asked any of these people before this started the effects of poverty on health, they would have waxed eloquent for, hours on what a terrible thing that is. Not now. Flatten the curve. A continued shutdown means hundreds of millions of Americans will downgrade a level. The following are real examples from our practices. Patient ES is a mother with 2 children whose office job was reduced to part-time and whose husband was furloughed. The father is drinking more, the mother is depressed and not managing her diabetes well, and the children are barely doing any schoolwork. Patient AF has chronic but previously stable health conditions. Her elective hip replacement was delayed, which caused her to become nearly sedentary, resulting in a pulmonary embolism in April. Patient RT is an elderly nursing home patient who had a small stroke in early March but was expected to make a nearly complete recovery. Since the shutdown, he has had no physical or speech therapy and no visitors. He's lost weight and is deteriorating rather than making progress. Patient SO is a college freshman who cannot return to normal life, school, and friendships. He risks depression, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, trauma, and future financial uncertainty. We are alarmed at what appears to be the lack of consideration for the future health of our patients. The downstream health effects of deteriorating a level are being massively underestimated and underreported. This is an order of magnitude error. It is impossible to overstate the short, medium, and long-term harm to people's health with a continued shutdown. Losing a job is one of life's most stressful events, and the effect on a person's health is not lessened because it has also happened to 30 million other people. Keeping schools and universities closed is incalculably detrimental for children, teenagers, and young adults for decades to come. The millions of casualties of a continued shutdown will be hiding in plain sight, but they will be called alcoholism, homelessness, suicide, heart attack, stroke, or kidney failure. And youth, it will be called financial instability, unemployment, despair, drug addiction, unplanned pregnancies, poverty, and abuse. Because the harm is diffused, there are those who hold that it does not exist. We, the undersigned, know otherwise. Please let us know if we may be of any assistance. And that's, I think that's a really important point that explains better these 2 pieces that I just read to you, the collateral damage that's going on. And I guess I'm somewhat mystified that this is happening. And I don't know anybody that isn't aware that we have a big unemployment problem in this country. I don't know anybody who isn't aware that stores are closed and people have lost their businesses and all that sort of thing, and kids aren't in school. And for Fauci to look into the camera and say it's really inconvenient. No, words can't describe how inappropriate that comment is. It's right up there with all the rich and famous saying we're in this together. Yeah, I don't think Tom Hanks is on my level in terms of being in this together. I think if Tom Hanks sat in this office and listened to the phone calls that came in here and read the emails, he might not think he's so together with the people that are going through the things that I talk about every week on this channel. So anyway, voices of reason who are not being heard. And I got kind of an angry email today I'll share with you to this point. This woman says, I haven't heard any doctors who agree with you. No experts agree with you, so why should I listen to you? And I wrote back and I said, the reason you're not hearing any doctors who agree with me, it's not that they're not out there. Here's 600 of them signed this letter. There are plenty of doctors and researchers who, from Yale and Harvard and prestigious universities, not just here, but all over the world. The guy in Sweden he's a virologist and was an advisor to the World Health Organization before he was an advisor to Sweden on health policy. So there are plenty of experts. They're just not being heard on the mainstream media because the message is being very tightly controlled to make sure that people stay afraid. It's wonderful to know that if you're watching this, you're not a person who's bought this stupid story. It's not a stupid story. It's it's a criminal act is really what's going on. We'll talk more about that later. More later on the criminal implications of some of this. But anyway, I'll continue to report on the resistance and the lawsuits and the reasonable people who are trying to reach out and come to some kind of a better path forward, other than just saying flatten the curve, keep the kids home. I'll just finish with this. I saw a heartbreaking picture. I'm sure you've seen it. It circulated on social media with kids sitting in chalked in boxes with plastic helmets on, some type of plastic apparatus, sitting in these little chalked in boxes. That's just got to be great for children's mental health. That's just got to be great for their mental health. And I think the people who did that, I think that's criminal. I think that's criminal, and I think they should pay for it. And maybe one day we'll get to see that. All right, that's all for today. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it. And if you're interested in any of our free stuff, careers, summer semester, learning from us, joining, we don't take money from anybody. We support everything we do here with earned income. So if you're inclined to support this type of work, buy stuff from us, enroll in classes, that sort of thing. So Pam Popper at msm.com is my email address. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.